And the way of the Rebbe to learn the Hilchos Abchira in the days bein Sorim. We have the honor today to have a Choshev in German, Harav Chosid, einer von den Choshev Askolim in unserer Keile, Harav Chosid, Harav Slepocnik is going to give us some insight into the Hilchos Abchira. Before he starts, everybody should give Tzedakah B'tzivu. There's pushkas here, and the most important thing is Mishal Zeicher Zayin, then the Binyan Beis Hamikdash now. Rav Slepocnik, get ready, okay.
The Sikha, the Rebbe, he said an interesting thing about a sector of the Chumrah. So I'm going to connect it to something here. I was just recently speaking to a friend of mine who told me that he's learning, I believe it was Gemara and Yuma. And over there, he said it's amazing, like any Indian in math that you ever look for, you'd see over there that Gemara and Yuma. We spoke a little bit about it. It had a lot of algebra there. It had obviously regular plus, minus, multiplication. Everything you'll find in Torah, of course. But regarding Hilchos Abchira, we have a very interesting concept. It's known as the Yam Shel Shlomo, right? That Shlomo Melech made in the first Beis Hamikdash. And he made a place, a mikvah in essence, for the Kaidim to go taival. And over there we have a very interesting phenomenon where there's an entire calculation of the Gemara. And as we're going to see, the Gemara is actually trying to prove the exact opposite of what we know from math today. And obviously we'll explain how that fits. So, in Malachim Al Perek Zayin starts off, there's basic on the Shlema, Shleishes Yishana, Ve'echalasko Ve'esayat. So it starts off the description of the Beis Hamikdash that Shlomo Melech built. So, also Chaf Gimel, we have 4 psukim which speak about the Yam Shel Shlomo. It starts off, Ayasas Hayam Mutzak. Shlomo Melech made an ocean, in other words, a very, very big bath, big mikvah. Eser ba'ama misfasev al sfase. 10 amas across. In English we know this as the diameter. Okay, from one end to the other. Agel saviv, it was round. Chamish ama, and it's 5 amas tall. So 5 amas tall. 10 amas across. But it's round, right? Unlike a square, which if you have it 5 amas tall and 10 amas across, it's very easy to measure it. Here it's in fact 5 amas tall, 10 amas across, but it is a circle. And therefore the pasuk says, "V'kov shloishim ba'ama yasav saviv." So the circumference in English, you go around, you have 30 amas around. Okay. So I remember actually. I'll start off with something interesting. I'll ask someone to answer a question, though, but don't be embarrassed. It's okay. It's a trick question. So I think we were discussing this concept. I think I was in Shir Beis Mesifta, and my teacher asked me a question. What is the circumference of the world? How big is the world approximately? Anyone knows? Roughly within the 10,000 miles.
8,000.
What?
8,000.
Now that's the diameter. Circumference of the world is 24,000. Yeah, so very good. 24,000 miles, about 130 million feet. Okay? So if you take a rope and you would wrap it around the entire world, how long would that rope be? Around 130 million feet. Now if I told you that I want to pull the rope an additional foot across the entire world, that way the rope is circling the entire world, but there's a foot of space in between. How much longer does that rope need to be? Anyone want to take a guess?
In between every foot of space?
The entire world is surrounded by a rope, but there's an additional foot in every single direction. 130 million feet. How many more feet do you need? 1. What? 6. 6 more feet. Right? Because now your diameter is 2 feet wider. And 2, if you use pi, times 3, you have approximately 6 extra feet, and you can surround the entire world by an additional foot. Okay? So that's going to be our discussion today, because the Torah says clearly, Malachim says clearly, that the Yam was 3 times more. It was 30 amas around, while it was only 10 amas across. So the Mefarshim start off right away, but so the Tzava brings down the Kav Shloishim. Kol sheyesh barach by echad, yesh bekav shleisha. It brings down from erev and daf and lav. There's a discussion over there. We're going to see it presently. That everything that's 1 amma across is 3. 1 amma across is 3 amas around. Now the Gemara brings down over here. I'll zoom in a little bit, so we can see clearly. Okay. So the Mishnah starts off in Vav, Daf Nehema Beis, it brings a bunch of halachas, and it ends off. The Mishnah ends off that it's a psak in the Mishnah. Kol shish be'kefa shleishet tefachim yesh b'reichav tefach. He uses the opposite calculation. It's trying to figure out how big the amud needs to be. So it says if it's 3 amas across, it must be 1 amma. If it's 3 amas around, it must be 1 amma across. Something on the bottom of the next page. Very interesting question. The Gemara asks minahani mili. Minahani mili. Now, usually minahani mili, or let's say when the Gemara says minala, what does minala mean? Minala means where in the Torah do we see this halacha? Okay, minahani mili is similar, right? But it's not from the Torah. We're going to bring psukim to prove it. Mili, it's the only place in Torah. Ask where do we know this calculation? We're going to see why it's important. The Gemara asks where do we know that something that's 3 amas around is 1 amma across? Now, if anyone thinks for a second, it's a very strange question. It's very, very hard to understand, right? Because the Gemara is not going to ask, right, from where do we know that the, find some other mathematical fact or any other fact. From where do we know that water, when you freeze it, it becomes bigger? It's a fact. Every single thing in the world, when you freeze it, becomes smaller. Water, we know, when you freeze it, it becomes bigger. Right, and it's Shach Ta'alach in different places, going snow and stuff like that. So, is the Gemara going to ask, where do we know that when you freeze water, it becomes bigger? No, because that's a fact, right? So, where do we know that something which is 1 amma, 3 amas around is 1 amma across? The Gemara asks minahani mili, and whoever can read the English over here, I forget where this quote is from. And the pasuk says, if you made it 10 amas across and it's round, how many amas is it all the way around? How big is the circumference? 30 amas. So we learn from the pasuk that something which is 10 amas across is 30 amas around, and from there we can learn that something which is, let's say, 7 amas across must be 21 amas around. So we have a psak din, so to speak. We learn from the Torah that anything which is 1 amma across, or in this case the opposite, anything which is 3 amas around is 1 amma across. Now, the Gemara asks, wait a second. For some reason, the Gemara's understanding that when it says 10 amas across, it's only speaking about the inside. And why is that? Obviously, because as we're going to see a little bit later in the Gemara, what's the point of measuring this Yam Shel Shlomo? What is the point of measuring it? The point of
no. One thing I want to tell you about she is coming in a second.
What is the idea of the pasuk telling us how big this Yam Shel Shlomo is? It's in order to know how much water is inside.
That's coming down, no joke.
Amen. She comes. So we're going to see in a second, why does the Torah tell us how big this Yam Shel Shlomo is? We're going to see soon, because we want to know how much water is inside. Therefore, the Gemara says, okay, so the pasuk says that it's 30 amas around and 10 amas across. That must be the inside. That must be how much water there is there. But the Gemara asks that if you're trying to tell me that it's 30 amas around, that means that the inside is 30 amas, but including the rim, obviously in order to hold all that water in place, you have to have a rim over there. Including that rim, it must be more. So in other words, the pasuk is telling us that anything which is 10 amas across is actually more than 30 amas around. So in other words, the pasuk is contradicting the Mishnah, so to speak. Okay? So I'm going to summarize this in a second. It gets a little bit complicated, but let's just go further. Second, Amar Rav Papa, Sfasir Sfas Perach Shushan. That even though we're going to see soon that it's going to say the thickness of the wall was an additional tefach, okay? But when you got to the top of the mikvah, it was only mamish like a rose, like the petal of a rose, which is mamish very 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 thin. So too when it goes around, it was a tiny sheet of metal holding the top. So when we're measuring 30 amas, we're talking about the top of the. I could just scroll down. I'll skip ahead just to show it in a picture form a little bit. So here, for example, we're going to see later in the Gemara. Actually, the Gemara is forced to say that actually the mikvah was square at the bottom and only the top was round. But anyway, imagine that this is the top. The thickness of the metal on top over here was a tiny thickness. So therefore, if you measure the 10 amas across from here to here, you really get pretty much exactly 10 amas. And when you measure all the way around, according to this, you would get exactly 30. Again, we're going to have to explain how this fits with the fact that 10 amas will equal actually closer to 31 amas. 31 amas. Yeah, an additional amma, 1.4 actually.
Pi
to be exact.
isn't exact.
Exactly. We're going to show pi in 1 second. So that's what we're going to say over here. So
Pi is 3.14.
yeah, we're going to get to the exact calculation. So now the so on the Melachim, Ralbag gets into this right away and says that when you want to know, in fact, how much is the circumference of something, you're right that you have to have 3 times, but then you have to add a 1/7 of the diameter. Okay, the diameter again is the line across. So if you have a pool which is 10 amas across, a 1/7 of 10 is 1.4. Okay, 7 times 14 is 98. So 1.4 is almost exactly a 1/7 of the diameter. So the Ralbag says that the circumference around of this pool, of the Yam Shel Shlema, was actually an additional 1.4 amas. In other words, 31.4 amas, almost exactly pi. Pi is a drop more than that, but he says bekiruv, right? And we're going to see soon that the word bekiruv is very...
Actually, 3.14.
I'm sorry that I'm going over. 265, yeah. That's bekiruv. That's actually I'm going to go very quickly. I'm sorry, I didn't miss how late it was. This word bekiruv is very, very important. That it is that the calculations here are not perfect. So I'm just gonna skip to Taisus 1 second. Taisus asks, Rashi first of all says that there was only an additional piece, and Taisus says right? Anyone can do any math, or even more. We're going to see soon. Taisus actually brings down in another place that if you want to measure a circle, just take a needle, put it in the middle, wrap a string around it and around it and around it till you have a circle, and you measure. You actually cut that circle in half. Taisus describes how to do it. Cut the circle in half and take that string they just cut in half, and you'll realize that it's exactly 3.14. It gives the calculation times the diameter of the circle. So Taisus actually says that it's very well known. It's very easy to calculate the exact amount of how much a circle, how many times it is the diameter. So, summarizing the question, I'm sorry, I'm going to go very, very quickly. The Gemara wants to prove that actually the Yam Shel Shlema was exactly 3 times 10, exactly 30, not a centimeter more. And they prove it. They say that they bring a bunch of calculations, and actually it's exactly 3 times 10. How does it fit with contemporary math, and not even contemporary math, but math forever? Math never changed.
If you measure from the inside, maybe it's
so that's what they say, right? You measure from the inside, exactly, right? But the Gemara wants to prove. The Gemara says, where do we know that if the pool is 10 across, it must be exactly 30? Where do we know that from? So, in the they bring down from the I think from the Gra and a few other places. This is the Rosh asks this question, what's going on? And the Gemara and the Rosh explains like this: the Gemara is trying to tell us. Of course, we know that something which is 10 across is 31.4 around. That's for sure. The Gemara is saying Mina Hanamili to tell us that we bedafke ignore it. What does it mean bedafke ignore it? Anytime in halacha we ask a question, how much larger is the circumference versus the diameter? La halacha, it's 3 times, not more and not less. L'chumra and l'kula. Okay, so let's say you make according to this, as far as I understand, let's say you make a mikvah, and according to your calculations, you have to have it exactly 1 amma across, and that way you'll have 3 ammas around, because a mikvah needs to be 3 ammas by 1 amma by 1 amma. La halacha, you have to look at it that you triple it exactly. You do not look at it more, you do not look at it less. And they bring down over there, why is that? They bring down the next page. Sorry, I can't get into the background of how this works, but they bring down the next page. The Torah was given to the average person. Since the average person, they actually bring down a quote that pi is known to be an irrational number. It's a number that can't be understood. You can never measure the circle. It never ends. You cannot because it's an irrational number, no person can actually measure it properly. And therefore the Torah says you actually ignore the number and you look at it bedafka that anything which is 10 amas or anything which is 3 amas is exactly 1 amma and not more and not more and not less. Okay, sorry I couldn't get into it too much, but let's share that a little. What's that? I'll just finish up. You were in the middle. Okay, so to summarize where we got up to, I'll go through it really quick again. So we have a pasuk. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We have a pasuk. The pasuk says that Yam Shlomo was 10 amas across and 30 amas around. We have simple mafarshim that say that it is that it's bekiruv, it's around. Really it's more. Some people try to explain that it's 10 amas across and 30 amas from the inside of the wall. The Gemara seems to ask me not either, like, where do we know that? It is that something that's 3 amas around is 1 across, and we got up to here. Okay, so we're up to where Taisa based less. What is the reason for this? Why is this that the Torah would say something which doesn't? So Taisa asks, why would the Gemara try to be medayik something which is so easy to just say it's Bekira? Like, the fact is that this is the number, and the number never ends. And Taisus actually brings down, Taisus obviously doesn't have that many times where he brings pictures and stuff like that, but Taisus actually makes a picture where he proves exactly how to measure the exact measurement of how wide a string is. If you measure from here to here, you'd make a circle around and around, you take the outer string, and you'll see it's 3 and a 7th. In other words, obviously it's more than 3. And he even explains that what the Gemara says in other places, that a square is 1/3 more than a circle. He says it, and if you take this string and you cut it in half, and then you take the same thing with the square and you cut it in half, you'll see that this string folds in. For example, if it's a tefach across, this string would fold into half a tefach times 3. In other words, a tefach and a half. And if you did the same thing with a square, the string would fold into half a tefach times 4. So math is exact. There's no way to argue with it. And to show how exact the math is, if you look at the next Amud, Yudaldim and Beis Erevin, the pasuk brings down a little bit later that this is in pasuk. Yam Shlomo starts off in Parak Zayin pasuk Chav Gimel. In Parak Chav Vav it says that it had Alpayim Bas Yachid, that the measurement of all the water in the Yam Shlomo was 6,000 sa'ah. A bas is 2 sa'ah, is 3 sa'ahs, so 2,000, it's 6,000 sa'ah. And the Gemara gets into a whole calculation how 40 sa'ah is 1 amma by 1 amma by 3 amas, which is known as 3 cubic amas, and therefore if you measure the entire area of the mikvah, it would have to be exactly this amount. And then they say, the Gemara says, what?
150 mikvahs, right?
150 mikvahs, yeah. So, and then they say, okay, so you have to say that it was 5 amas tall, but the bottom 3 amas was square, and the top 3 amas was 2, and then, like we said, that the bottom was a tefach and the top was thin. Like, these calculations is just putting it into numbers, but the Gemara should go through each one of these calculations. So what's going on? That the Gemara said, oh, it's Bekiruv. The Gemara doesn't do Bekiruv. The Gemara goes into exact measure, and the Gemara says, wait a second. It says in the pasuk that the bottom of the mikvah was 12 oxen, and it's 3 by 3 by 3 by 3. And everyone understands if you take 12 oxen, you do 3, 3, 3, 3. It's a square, right? So the Gemara proves that the pasuk tells us, the pasuk hints to us that you have to go exact. You can't say the entire mikvah was round. I'm going through it very quickly, but everyone understands that the Gemara is trying to be the exact mamish to the sa'ah, exactly how wide it is. So there's 2 explanations. One explanation is that when it comes to pi, when it comes to how much a circle is around, it's impossible to measure. There is no measurement. Once there's no measurement, the Torah is not going to tell you something bikira. The Torah is not going to tell you, oh, so take something which is a little bit more than a tefach, and therefore it's going to be a little bit more than 3 tefachim, and that should be your measurement. The Torah is going to give you an exact measurement. By the amount of water, it's simple. If you take 3 amas, and you take 3 amas and you square it, and then you take the next 2 amas and you round it, you'll see mamish ends up being exact. But you cannot measure it's impossible to give you a number, what was the circumference of the mikvah? The number doesn't exist, right? Everyone that knows that's read it knows that pi doesn't, the number doesn't exist. There is no number that measures how much larger the circumference is versus the diameter. Now, that leads to machlekes what the halacha is. According to the opinion that I said quickly before Ma'ariv, because the number doesn't exist, the Torah actually goes down to a simple number, 1 to 3. If it's 3 around, it's 1 across, and that's the halacha, l'chumra and l'kula. It's a tshuva the Tashbats. I looked it up over here. It's the Tashbat says, even though he himself brings the whole explanation how you can answer it, he says the halacha sai l'kula sai l'chumra. You have to look at it that it's 3 to 1. Another explanation that's brought down is that, and the follow-up to that explanation is again, the Torah is actually given to everybody. So even though many people, the Ralbag and Taisvus, they brought explanations how to measure it, but even those explanations, again, they're going to be Bekiruv, because the Ralbag said it's a seventh. A seventh is very close to pi. Taisvus said you take a string and you measure it, and you measure it fine. You'll still won't get the exact number because the number doesn't exist. So therefore, the Torah uses a number that is so simple, 1 to 3, that anyone can measure to say that the Torah wants us to use that number l'kula l'chumra. The other way of looking at it is that if you look at the pasuk, let me open it one more time. Sorry, then we'll finish. You look over here. The pasuk says v'kav, that the kav over here means the circumference. It's interesting that there's a kriya and a ksiv, right? So kav, the ksiv is 106. Kava with the hay, that's the ksiv. Sorry, the ksiv is with the hay. It's 111. It's brought down the name of the gra. When I saw this, I was like, I had to look up the mucker, but I found this random PDF. But here they're bringing the gra. So kava is 111. Kava is 106. Again, the number pi is almost impossible to find. Like there's like maybe 2 numbers out of the trillions of numbers that when you divide them one by the other will come to pi. Right? It almost doesn't exist. But the kav and kava happen to be one of those numbers. If you take 111 and you divide it by 106, you'll get 1.04 or something. And you multiply by 3, it's mamish exactly 3.1.15, on and on and on. So it's one of those things that if someone didn't say it, no one will be able to say it. But it's said that in the pasuk itself, it's meramez that even though la halacha will tell you that 10 equals 30, and you just triple it and you forget about the rest of the numbers, but the Torah knows exactly, even the irrational numbers, the Torah knows exactly by hiding in the pasuk itself the exact number of what is the circumference of a tefach. If it's 1 tefach across, it's 3.1415 and on. And that is in fact how big the Yam Shel Shlomo was. That Shlomo was able to come to this conclusion exactly how much it was, even though la halacha we do not use it. We'll leave it at that for now.